Welcome to Soul Science, the official podcast of Sports and Exercise Podiatry Australia. We're your hosts, Pat, Harriet, and Darcy. We're all dedicated sports podiatrists with a passion for advancing our profession. In each episode, we delve into the latest research, share compelling stories from clinicians, and feature special guests who've made meaningful contributions to the field of sports and exercise podiatry and lower limb sports medicine. Darcy, Harriet,
Good,
how are
Patrick.
you?
How are you?
I'm very well. I've just finished my run this evening and I'm very sore. Yourself?
Excellent. Yeah, no, I'm doing pretty well. Doing pretty well. Pretty busy day at the clinic. I did have a little trot this morning, and yeah, happy to be here.
Think the nights are getting darker and the mornings are getting darker as well.
It's finally cooling down here in southeast Queensland, which I'm pretty happy about. The humidity's just been on another level the last few months.
Yeah. Harriet, how's the Harbour Bridge?
Good. We had our first cold day as well, actually.
Yeah.
It was a relief. It was still high humidity, but it was lovely to have like a bit of rest from the heat.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to share today's guest. Today's guest is someone who truly represents the intersection of clinical excellence, elite sport, and practical innovation in podiatry. Emma Poynton is a highly experienced sports podiatrist with over 15 years of experience in the field and holds a Master of Health specialization in podiatric medicine. She's worked extensively across elite football, tennis, skiing, ice hockey, and brings an athlete's perspective to her clinical care. Emma is the current podiatrist for the Western Bulldogs AFL, AFLW, and VFL teams, and is part of the elite sports medicine unit of the Australian Open Grand Slam tennis, working with some of the best players in the world. She has a deep history in winter sports as both a high-level ice hockey player and a coach, and is a qualified master boot fitter, helping athletes solve complex interface between orthotic equipment and biomechanics. Emma's approach is grounded in biomechanics, injury prevention, and athlete-centered care. She's passionate about education, having presented for the Australian Podiatry Association and Physio Associations. Emma's story is not just about treating athletes, it's also about being one. This episode offers an inside look at what it takes to lead in one of the toughest sports in the world, the sacrifices involved, the personal growth that comes from facing challenges head on. Emma, welcome to Soul Science.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction.
You're welcome. Well,
Emma, so cool that you're a master boot fitter. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, I've sort of did that many, many years ago because of the interest in winter sports and skiing in particular. And I guess you get caught out a few times when people walk into your clinic room and you don't know what you're doing, and you go and source more information. So it was one of those courses that I sort of did to, tick the box, but out of personal interest to myself.
Very cool.
well, to start us off, Emma, what does sports and exercise podiatry mean to you?
Yeah, it's a big question. I guess so often we look at the elite. So often we say, oh, you're a sports podiatrist treating elite, but in my mind, it's anything that doesn't involve, general treatment and beyond in the sense of biomechanics and musculoskeletal and footwear and educating athletes and educating patients who, do anything from club sport to elite sport. So it's a pretty broad topic. You can't put it into one sentence or one neat little snippet or soundbite, I don't think. So look, it's a little bit of everything from juniors who do sport to oldies that do sport to the elite that do sport in between that walk in our door that we tend to look after.
I think that's a perfect answer. You've got a deep background in winter sports and ice hockey and stuff. What unique challenges do you see when you're working with athletes in those sort of environments from a podiatry perspective?
Yeah, look, the main thing when you start looking at winter sports, in particular skating, I'll start with ice skating, is that, if you keep it simple, these sports aren't heel to toe forward sports. Humans are essentially designed to go heel to toe in a forward motion. And when you start looking at skating, for example, the way we skate, and I'm talking ice hockey, speed skating, figure skating, these sports are powered through essentially driving off the medial edge of your foot. So we're designed to go heel to toe forward, and all of a sudden these sports start, trying to jam the foot into a carbon fibre boot, which is pretty rigid and pretty uncomfortable. And then you're trying to jam that foot medially down on one blade as hard as you can to, drive power through the blade, through the ice to get speed and momentum. And the same goes for skiing. When you start looking at winter sports, you're jamming your foot into a hard, rigid plastic boot. And the idea of skiing is that inside-outside edge, rotating inside-outside. Again, it's not exactly heel to toe, which is what we're essentially built to do. So the biggest challenges, I guess, is the movement patterns and the rigidity of the boots and the skates that you're trying to deal with and the present with you.
What sort of strength exercises do those sort of athletes need to do to kind of push off the medial edge? And
Look, a lot of the, if we want to talk skating and skiing, majority of the power comes from the bottom half.
Yeah.
So the joke is you can't buy jeans if you're a male ice hockey player because your rear end and your hamstrings and your quads are so, like professional skaters have really big quads, hammies and glutes. That's essentially where the power comes from. When you're locked into a ski boot or a skate, you have limited dorsiflexion or ankle movement or plantar flexion through the ankles. So you're not looking so much to do foot strengthening per se, because a lot of this power is coming from higher up the limb.
Yeah, okay. Do you find it hard, or do you think athletes find it hard to fit a variety of different feet in different boots?
Yeah, look, the biggest problem when you start looking at winter sports boots, and let's look at ski boots, for example. First of all, they're financially not cheap. A pair of ski boots will cost you, easily 1,000, 1,500 up if you're buying new ski boots.
Wow.
You've got to weigh up your option. When you sort of start looking at boots to fit, fit someone, are you fitting the weekend warrior for comfort who might want a slightly more comfortable boot? And they're going to ski, on average, an Australian might ski, 3 weekends. So it could be 6 to 9 days, say, for example, in a pair of comfort boots. Or are they a little bit more advanced and they want a performance boot where you might sacrifice comfort? And then you also start looking at the break-in process of a boot, that if I said to you, buy a new footy boot, wear it 6 times, it's going to be perfectly fitted for your foot. They're a bit more moldable, so to speak. But trying to fit a foot with any form outside the normal. So let's talk Taylor's bunions, big toe bunions. Let's talk hammer toes. Let's talk a caver's foot type. They're very, very difficult to fit boots for.
They are really notoriously tough, those boots. I've fitted a couple with different orthotics, and it just, the inside mold of those boots is so odd. It's so different.
Yeah, and look, that's one of the things where you say we start fitting orthotics as practitioners or podiatrists. There's always been, I guess, a little bit of a turf war between the ski shops and boot fitters and their sort of semi-prefabricated devices and what we make. The biggest mistake podiatrists will make when it comes to fitting something into a skate or a ski boot is we go straight to what we know, and that's a rigid device. Long story short, rigid devices do not work in skates, and that's because there's actually a bulb that goes transversely across the foot and longitudinally across the foot.
Right.
So more often than not, we fit orthotics into a relatively flat-soled shoe or a flat base we work off. But when you start dealing with a bulbed surface in underneath the foot transverse and longitudinally, all of a sudden it becomes very difficult to fit things in. And keep in mind, there's not much spare volume inside these boots. Inside skates, there's very little volume. You want them super snug to maximize output performance. So as soon as you load the medial aspect of the foot, it reacts and responds to the boot, which reacts to the blade and drives through the ice. And it's exactly the same with a ski boot. The worst thing you can have with a ski boot is a loose boot that allows your foot. Imagine being in a gum boot and trying to control a ski if your foot's swimming around like it's in a gum boot. It simply doesn't work.
Emma, are there different entry options for boots? So is it always top entry, or can you go like open the back and enter from the back and clip it in?
Yeah, if you go back sort of to the 80s, there were lots of what they call rear entry boots.
Yep.
Majority of boots are top entry. Having said that, there's I think Nordica and Full Tilter. There's a few brands at the moment who are offering rear entry boots. One, they're like, yes, they're much, much easier to get into. So a lot of the oldies love them. I legitimately asked someone if they were manufacturing rear entry boots the other day, because I reckon I'll be in them before too long. So some companies will have rear entry boots available, and it's personal preference, or it can be an accessibility option that if you struggle to get your foot into a standard upper entry boot, you can look at a rear entry boot, because they literally then just open up a bit more.
Yeah.
That's actually very cool. Particularly the concave base of a skate shoe. I didn't actually know that. When you do an orthotic prescription, do you have to like ring the lab to say, hey, I'm doing it for a skate shoe? And do they give you a little bit of extra material?
What I normally do is that we wouldn't make a rigid orthotic device for a skate. I always go, like, if anything, I might honestly go sort of 1 mil and with a sort of pour on arch fill to give it some body. And then I might actually get the skate into the clinic and sort of grind and modify it, because they do taper in a little bit, but you want to have them give. The number one presentation, I guess, you see with skaters, if you've skated, it's like all sports. If you've done something since you were 3, you're going to be good at it and you're going to be used to it and your body's trained for that. If you've taken up skating or ice hockey or figure skating and the classic is a young professional, and you've finished university, you've got a bit of spare cash, you're going to try a new sport, you've got a bit of extra time now, you're not studying. Think about these sort of 24, 25-year-olds that have never driven their maximum body force through the medial arch in a lateral sort of transverse motion. They're the ones that blow up their plantar fascias, blow up their arches. They're the ones that discover they've got a little extra navicular bone hanging off the inside of their foot because they've never done something to irritate them. So, yes, something that's pliable and will accommodate within a skate and fit within a skate flush is the golden ticket. Figure skating is harder again because there's often little to no room in figure skating skates. They're very, very snugly fitted. And often we see the younger athletes, the sort of U18 girls, have often already got sort of hammer toe, claw toes, bunions because they've already jammed their feet in skates that are too small for the best part of a decade or more.
Would the majority of your athletes or athletes in general be able to find commercially available stuff, or do you think custom skates or boots are the next level? And how accessible is that?
Yes, look, the majority are buying off-the-shelf products. They do offer custom-made designs. They do offer 3D scanning. The degree at which a skate is custom-made, I have questions on. I'm sure, there's a custom orthotic where you 3D scan a foot and that's made for that person's foot. I must admit I'm not fully convinced custom skates are fully customized because it depends on who serves you in the store. It depends on who scans you. It depends on who's at the other end overseas making the skate. And the general feel at the moment, it's still very hit and miss.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of nuance to the fitting of boots. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Moving on to football, or in this case, AFL, AFLW, and the VFL. What injuries are you seeing at the moment, or trends and patterns, I guess, in the last 12, 24, 36 months in the foot and ankle?
Look, when you say I work in AFL, I guess the number one thing that I often say to podiatrists who want to get into footy or want to get into elite sport is the number one thing I see is general treatment. It is calluses, it is blisters, corns, not so much, but they do appear. So you said, what's the number one trend? And what am I doing every week at a footy club? And it's going to be general treatment. So people who think sports podiatry is all glamorous and biomechanics and fitting runners and musculoskeletal assessments and orthotics, you have to have really good general treatment skills. You have to have really good skills holding that scalpel blade and using that Morse disc. So that's the first thing we see. Other things we see, one day when I get a spare moment to breathe, I'm going to do a little bit of a count up of how many footballers have, degenerative first metatarsal phalangeal joints or the early stage HAV or just funky big toe joints as a whole, because I'm pretty confident it's more prevalent within the football world. And whether that's the nature of the game, the pushing off in a certain direction to avoid tackling, or the design of footy boots that these boys have grown up in since they were, 5-year-olds. But yeah, generally big toe, whether it's sesamoid or HAV, that would probably be my second thing that I'm seeing. Plus your pre-season overload niggles, I'm not going to call them stress fractures because we get very few of them, but just stress overload where players will report they're a bit sore through, a metatarsal or a bit sore through a medial shin, for example. And they're pretty well managed now. They don't graduate or, accelerate into actual stress reactions, stress fractures. Load management is something that's taken very seriously before these guys actually progress them into more serious injuries.
You think big toe stiffness affects their ability to kick or improves their ability to kick?
I don't know if it changes their ability or affects their ability in a way, or, makes the ability to kick positive, but just as a general population, I look at my guys and look, I've been at Dogs 11 years now, and it's definitely more common compared to what books through my clinic door. So maybe it's just my pool of, 40 guys. Maybe it's a broader AFL thing, and not even AFL. It could be AFL down to, the local amateurs, for example. I'm not sure if it would give them a better ability to kick, and I'm not sure if they got drafted because they got a funky big toe joint, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of like boot selection advice, bearing in mind, some players might have certain sponsorships with certain brands and things like that. But what makes I guess, a good boot fit for you in football?
Yeah, look, it's a loaded question. So when you say what's a good boot, what's the best boot, what brand should I buy? Like, what's the best runner I should buy? We've all had that question in the clinic. I mean, everyone gets asked that from patients in the clinic. And the only question that annoys me more is, oh, what boot should I buy my kid? And you've never met the kid or seen the kid's foot or anything like that. And we get asked that all the time. Like, what's the best boot? And I always answer a bit tongue in cheek saying, a Ferrari might be the best race car, but if I've got 6 kids and a dog, a 2-seat race car is absolutely useless at my end. So that's sort of how I sort of jokingly put that in perspective. But I guess both football boot selection and runners selection from all players at all levels is super important. It's absolutely vital you get that right, either as a professional or an amateur player. So boot fit and selection has to be priority when you start treating these athletes. What we do in the AFL world at Western Bulldogs, every pre-season I screen every player. So that's normally sort of late November, December when the boys return from their off-season break. And that involves screening 45 senior footballers. And a typical screen includes me looking at everything from its dermatology. So it's skin, nails, any calluses. We note that down and we get them back in for review for a cleanup. Then I actually film them running and walking. So I have a baseline, touch wood, should they get injured later on in the year, I have that baseline saved up on the cloud of my iPad. So if they get injured, we can compare pre or post injury. We can, compare what happened before they did their ACL or after ACL surgery or something like that. And it's when I do this pre-season screen, I start saying, well, what boot's going to be good for this individual? So I can't tell you this is the best boot. We are sort of semi-brand locked with ASICS at the Bulldogs. We're the only AFL club sponsored directly by ASICS. So we do have very good access to very good boots, and I respect and credit them for that. But what do I look for? If someone presents with a flipper foot, a really tight, skinny footy boot, even if it's the best on the market to some people, is not going to be good for them. But I definitely love a heel pitch. So I definitely love having the heel elevated up. Some players, and a hurdle we come across is some players are brand locked through sponsorship. And I might think that this boot and this model, this brand and this model boot's the best for them. But they might say, hey, Em, I'm sponsored by this company, and there isn't an equivalent. So that's when we have to get a little bit creative by adding bits and pieces to boots, modifying boots, and what you and the general public see athletes running across, the MCG and on Saturday afternoon at 2:00 looks exactly like what you can walk into Rebel Sport and buy, but internally the structure's been modified or changed or additions have been added, for example. So features in a nutshell, good fit for the shape of the foot. So width, wide boot, if it's a wide foot, slim boot, if it's a slim foot, the volume of that boot. Do we need a higher volume boot if we're adding additions to it, like an orthotic? And then you start looking at things like the stud pattern and grip based on the turf, etc. Keeping in mind metal studs are banned in the AFL world.
Yeah, okay.
I reckon,
right.
Emma, you were the podiatrist that taught me that you can grind studs on boots about 6 or 7 years ago. That was iconic.
So that's the little hack that the typical, say someone's got a bit of a sore sesamoid, or they might have a high pressure point underneath a second med, or if there's a high pressure point, why not cut a third of the stud off? Send them out, test it. If it feels good, you might take a bit more off. And some players are really protective of their boots. They won't like you taking a scalpel to it or grinder to it, but just a little bit, try a little bit, test it, come back, bit more, test it, come back, bit more, and find the happy medium. And exactly as you say, Harriet, no one's going to know that boot's modified when they're, pitching on the back page of the Herald Sun.
Emma, do the boys at Bulldogs have access with ASICS to be able to, for ASICS to modify the shoes for them, just with that extra bit of closeness?
No, so the boots aren't custom made, if that's what you mean. So unlike, you start looking at tennis players, like the number one tennis players are obviously getting custom made shoes straight from, Nike or whoever they're sponsored by. We don't have ASICS modified boots. If we need to do bigger modifications, let's say, I actually have a cobbler that we send our boots to locally, and he does that for me. So yeah, typically it's either myself or a local cobbler doing the modifications for us.
And is that something you would do at the club, or do you have to take it back to clinic, modify, and then bring it back?
Depending what it is, often I sometimes take it back to the clinic. I don't have a grinder on site at the footy club. I don't have a drill on site at the footy club. So depending what it is, I might take it back. But also, let's not overcomplicate it. There's not that many boots modified.
Yeah, sure.
Sometimes we might be installing a 10 mil heel lift, like a heel pitch, sorry,
Yep.
externally on a boot. What we tend to do, if you're a player that needs something like that, we don't do one at a time. We have a supply ready to go. Because if you've got a modified boot and you blow it out the captain's run Friday morning and you don't have a boot to wear Saturday, we're in trouble. So often we've got at least 3, one game boot, one training boot, and one new boot just in case. And you sort of have a rotation like that on standby.
Yeah. You mentioned tennis briefly just before. Just thought go a bit into the Australian Open and your involvement. What do you think some of the biggest podiatry challenges are in elite tennis at the moment in the Grand Slams?
Look, the biggest podiatry challenge in Grand Slam and tennis is there is no podiatry.
Sure.
When I came on board, it was actually Jason Augusta who was at the tennis prior to me. I think he was there for 13 years and he retired. And then the position opened up. And when I came on board, I came on full time. So I'm actually on site for 22 days straight. And it's I am the first podiatrist at a Grand Slam to do that full-time position. And it's something the players, the first year we did it was Melanie Olmazzolo, who was head of TA Medical at the time. And she goes, we don't know if this is going to work. We don't know what to expect. We don't know if the players will, buy into it, so to speak, but we're going to give it a shot. And it's part of Tennis Australia and the Australian Open's idea of offering the best services. We have so many services on site. It's actually amazing. And the biggest hurdle is the players aren't used to having a podiatrist there. So that's the biggest roadblock for podiatry. I've worked very hard with players, earning players' trust. Every single player I have, said, let's cut that off, shave that off, sand that off. Every single player until they get to know you is hesitant. And every single player, I can assure you, has turned around and gone, oh, no, look, I've had a really bad experience. I've had someone take too much of that callus off and then I blistered up during the game and it ruined my tournament. So my number one pro tip for tennis players and elite athlete, a little bit often is far superior and better for them than too much in one go. Because if you cut too much off, so if I cut too much callus off one of the guys and they jump on court and they rip their foot open because it's a hot day on a hard court, not a single player will ever see me ever again because they all talk to each other. I've learned that. And they all trust. If one trusts you, they all trust you. So if I fix one ingrown toenail, say I fix one Serbian toenail, I had 5 Serbians the next 2 days in my office. It was very funny my first year because you fix one well, they send all their friends from the locker room to you. But honestly, the biggest hurdle is lack of podiatry. And one of my missions is to increase the role of podiatry, both domestically here in Australia in the sports environment and globally as well. I want every Grand Slam to have a full-time podiatrist. I want every tournament to have a podiatrist available to players. That would be sort of my ultimate goal in the sense of what the roadblock is.
Are there any other Grand Slams apart from the Aussie Open that has a podiatrist?
Yeah, so look, all 4 Grand Slams have podiatry services, but not to the degree we have at the Australian Open. So I believe Wimbledon's got 1, maybe 1.5 involved. The French and US do have podiatrists, so I haven't actually linked up with yet. It's on the list of things to do. But I guess the difference with us is I build a clinic room in underneath Rod Laver. So if you're in my treatment room, I'm treating you. You can look over your left shoulder from my treatment chair and you can actually see baseline of centre court. That's where my office is based. So I'm in the dungeon of Rod Laver, but literally where the ball kids walk in and out of centre court, that's my door as well. So we do offer a full-time service. We have a full clinic where I rent a drill, we have a podiatry chair, we have a sterilizer. Everything you see in my clinic here is essentially on site at Rod Laver for the month, from foot models to sample shoes, sample orthotics, scanners, everything's on site. So that's the main difference, is it's a full clinical service, not sort of a token consulting, oh, the podiatrist is here for 3 hours this week kind of thing.
Yeah. And in your experience, how many professional athletes actually have their own podiatrist that come with them or use one?
None. As far as I know, none of the senior WTA or ATP players have a travelling podiatrist. And look, essentially, it's a viability thing. If you start traveling a physio, a manager, a podiatrists, unfortunately, are further down the food chain. They're going to travel a physio or a myotherapist before they travel a podiatrist.
Sure.
They're going to travel a coach or a hitting partner before a podiatrist. We're a long way down the food chain. And I'll happily be corrected, as far as I know, no one travels with a podiatrist. As soon as you travel an additional staff member, and I know this because I do external to podiatry, I general manage state ice hockey teams, I run international world championships for ice hockey, I chair international tournaments, so I'm used to seeing what the big teams all do and don't travel with. If you travel an additional staff member as a podiatrist, 1, you're paying their salary to be there. 2, you're paying their airfares. 3, you're paying a hotel room. 4, you're paying to feed them. You're dressing them, or your sponsor's dressing them. So it's not just their salary. All of a sudden, it's really expensive to pay, fly, like house, feed, plus, away from home allowance. And they just simply can't justify the costs.
Yeah.
So do you find that you have to teach the physios a little bit of what you do?
It's a bit of a bugbear that I have when I sit there and you watch the world's #1 player's physio scrape callus off his foot. I'm not saying I didn't see that this year. So look, it's a bit of a sore topic that as a podiatrist, you're sitting there watching coaches, you're sitting there watching physios, you're sitting there watching players cut things off their own feet. But I also respect and appreciate that not everyone's on a multi-million-dollar pay packet. There are players who literally are traveling by themselves. They can't afford a coach. They can't afford to travel a physio, let alone a podiatrist. So I have seen everyone with every qualification or lack thereof qualifications cut things off feet or bandage up blisters, etc. And look, I am pretty open and happy to help educate and help players. I do provide education because they do come and ask me, what about this dressing, or what about this, or what should we do? Because I get it. They're flying to a small tournament after this. They might be a qualifier off the Grand Slam circuit, trying to get their first start at a Grand Slam. They need every bit of help they can get. And if we can educate them to, better their career through their foot health, that's part of what we do, education.
Right.
In terms of the public hearing about podiatry and tennis, it was at least good where Rafael Nadal and his Mueller-Weiss syndrome, he does credit the custom orthotics for sort of keeping his career going. So it is at least good that we've got that one thing that podiatry did in tennis.
Yeah, look, Rafa definitely did give us some attention. I think Alex de Minaur's blisters as well. Alex's blisters last year, not this year, but last year also got a lot of attention as well. I think when the local TV station, channeled his blisters across the globe, all of a sudden people knew podiatrists existed to a certain degree. And look, it's not, it hasn't happened for a while, but some players do withdraw from tournaments simply because of blisters. They're so painful, they withdraw because of blisters. So there is definitely a need to introduce education for players and better healthcare services on the circuit for them.
Yeah.
I guess moving on to your sort of other experiences, Emma. You've been an athlete and you coach and you manage teams and you work, with a lot of different sports at the moment. How do you, I guess, in your experiences, empathize with your previous experiences and then current athletes who have injuries?
Yeah, look, I guess, I've been an athlete. A lot of people won't know this, but my background was running and track sprinting. So I've been a runner before I was heavily involved in ice hockey, and what ended my running career was an injury. To the lay person, I say, I blew up my foot, but I had a scarp ache and osteotomy through my right foot, and I've got some screws in my right foot, and that's what ended my running career prematurely. So I've been that athlete that's been injured and had to terminate an athletic career as a result of an injury. I've done a sports transition as a result of being injured. I've progressed through to coaching, as you mentioned. So I coach, state teams and international training camps. And I also manage state teams. I've managed Australian teams overseas. So you accumulate all of this information and knowledge. I can think like an athlete, I can think like a coach, and I can think like a manager. So classic example of that is I had a 17-year-old boy in today, and he's got, a minor injury that he needs to play a round robin of footy on Thursday to be scouted and seen for potential draft reasons.
Yep.
So if you weren't familiar with sport and the network and how it works and the importance of that, you might say, hey, sit in the corner for 3 weeks, you'll be right, it'll come good. My mind goes into this kid needs to be seen and he needs to be seen Thursday, so he needs to play. What do we do to fix him? And maybe it's a Band-Aid fix to fix him, but at the same time, this Band-Aid fix might be enough to get him through Thursday, and we deal with the consequences Friday, because that's sport. That's his pathway to, you know, higher level sport and a ticket to professional sport later on. So I guess, yeah, using all my different hats, and there's lots of hats spinning at one time, I can definitely bring that in to help empathize with patients, appreciate the urgency, and appreciate what we need to do now to get them through. Or do I have to have the conversation? I had to pull a girl out of the stall gift, you know, a few weeks ago, and she was ready to go. And to sit in my office and say, you can't run this year, was devastating. So I can empathize with that.
I guess for podiatrists who haven't been in those sorts of environments, what's your sort of advice on how to kind of get those sorts of experience and nuances?
I guess if we sort of rewind a couple of steps, if you want to get involved in sports medicine and sports podiatry, you need to know the sporting code.
Yep.
So for an athlete to respect you and your opinion, you need to use the right language. You don't want to, you know, if it's a ref, not an umpire, if it's a Guernsey, not a jersey, if it's a field, not a pitch, if it's a forward or if it's a back, not a defense, like you have to learn the language of the sport. You have to know the movement patterns of the sport. You have to know the equipment of the sport before you even start talking to these athletes. Because if you sit there and try and, you know, empathize with these athletes and you use the wrong language, I think they're just going to look at you and go, do you even know what you're talking about? So I think it's really important to know the sport and know the language, know the movement patterns, so you can then relate to the athlete when you talk to the athlete about their particular sporting code. Then when you talk to them, look, some of the conversations are tough. Athletes are seeing you because there's something wrong. They're not seeing you because the world's full of roses and rainbows today. They're seeing you because something's not right. It could be small. It could be, I've got a blister, I've got a corn, I chipped my toenail. It could be, I've got a stress fracture, I'm not running stall next week. I've spent, you know, 2 years planning to win this race and I can't run next week. Or it could be, I'm missing my grand final of the local junior netball. And when you're in year 11, that's the most important thing, to play, you know, A grade or APS sport, for example. That's heartbreaking for those athletes, even though they're junior athletes. So I think understanding the sport and understanding the athlete and talking their language is a golden ticket. If you sit on your high horse and you talk medical jargon, you're going to lose them because a lot of them won't understand you. So you break it down so they can process it, and you give it to them in small snippets so they can process it and understand it. And that way they can also, if need be, relay it to coaches, parents, managers, teammates, etc.
I think that's really good advice, because, you know, a lot of people who want to work in, say, sports podiatry or sports physio or a similar field, and they've never, I guess, set foot on a pitch or actually watch sport or learn sport, it's hard to resonate with athletes. So I think that's really good advice.
Look, you have to watch it. One of my advice is watch sport, and it doesn't have to be elite. Watch it on YouTube, watch it on TV, go to the local footy field. I use footy because I'm in Melbourne, obviously, but go to the local netball courts and watch the sport and just know the knowledge of it. And I said the terminology is the big one. I sat in a board meeting for a National Sporting Federation last year. Long story short, it's referees. But this board member kept saying umpires. I'm like, you're on the board of an NF. You're on the board of a national federation, and you don't know what your game officials are called in your sport. That guy lost my attention really quickly. And it's the same as practitioners. We have to know the code language so the athletes and the patients respect you.
All right. So moving on to our tech and tool spotlight, gateways to innovation. I guess you've seen over the last, 15 years or more of podiatry, you've seen trends come and go with tech, and, things come and then things leave, in, a matter of a couple of years. What technology has stood the test of time in your clinical practice?
I'm a big believer of keeping things simple and not overcomplicating them. Maybe it's because I'm old. But I've, and I'll just, have a treadmill. I know that's such a simple tool, and watching someone walk, someone run, someone move is so important. I keep it simple. I watch someone walk from the waiting room. I'll call someone in from the waiting room, and the way I move it, I'm at Paran Sports Medicine, and I say to them, oh, you know, Mrs. Smith, come through, we're third door on the right. And the reason I say that is I don't want them to follow me to my room. I want them to walk ahead of me, third door on the right, so I can actually watch them walk when they know that, before they know they're being watched, for example. So I like to say keep the technology simple. Watch someone walk in and then throw them up on the treadmill. And so treadmill's my go-to golden source. I also love the fact iPads are invented, because then you can film record stuff, save stuff. And, you know, the apps that come with that you can actually save something and compare it to pre and post, all that sort of stuff. So iPads, treadmills are my simple go-to, particularly with athletes. As I said earlier, that if we can record an athlete and have a baseline for the pro teams or the pro athletes you work with, you might want to, you know, refer to that later on if there's been a major injury or disaster during the season.
Is there any recommended gait apps that you use on the iPad?
Yeah, I don't even know what it's called. Is that really terrible? I used to use Coach's Eye.
Yeah.
I discontinued it, which was the worst thing that ever happened to someone like me. I'm using Dartfish at the moment, but I pay for the premium just so I can save it all.
Yeah.
The fact that I have to look at it, I just know it's the black app in the bottom right-hand side of my iPad.
Yeah, I think I use the same as well. It's really good.
Yeah, I don't have to terrible to actually look at the iPad then, but Dartfish is just my go-to easy one at the moment. It saves it all for me. It goes up in the cloud. If it's someone I want to look at potentially later on, when I do record, say I'm doing pre-season screening at the club, I'll record, you know, the player's name, number. So I might go the player's name, number, and I'd put, you know, ASICS Kayano with a CFO, with a custom foot orthotic, or with a over-the-counter, and list the over-the-counter brand, for example, because that way I might want to come back next year and go, oh, what did he have in his runner? Oh, what was he like with or without an orthotic, or what model shoe was that? Because as much as we go, oh, the blue shoe's that model this year, we might in 2 or 3 years' time go, oh, what was that blue shoe? I can't remember. So I always record the shoe name, model, and edition. And that's because, again, 11 years of the AFL system, I've tracked certain players for that duration, and I might want to refer back to a few years ago. So it's good to know name, player number, shoe model, shoe make, an edition of that shoe, and what's in that shoe.
Yeah. Do you have any experience, or do you use anything like Shockwave or any of other like Pocus or any of those sorts of things at the moment?
Yeah, look, both my clinics have got Shockwave machines, so that's probably the big go-to at the moment. And definitely I use that for plantar fascia, Achilles, patellas, hamstrings, etc. So yeah, Shockwave's probably the go-to at the moment. I always explain to patients, it's very witch doctor like. You don't see anything, you don't inject anything, there's no color. They're like, you know, you go and send someone for an injection, you can see it, you can feel it, kind of thing. And until you turn that machine on, they don't feel it, obviously. But it seems to work, and I've got belief in it at the moment. So that's our go-to.
Yeah. I guess you make some really good points. You don't really need too many fancy tools to be a good podiatrist.
Look, I guess it comes down to exposure. What will make you good, if for the new grads or the newer podiatrists, it comes down to exposure. You've got to see it, touch it, feel it, do it to learn it. And the big thing for new grads is watching as many people as you can walk, and depending where you position in the clinic and what your timeline's like, if you've got time, throw that extra patient up and have a look at them. And it just comes down replicating numbers. Get your numbers through to learn from that, so to speak. So yeah, I'm not a huge believer of massive intervention tools. Maybe I'll change in the coming years as the technology and the AI is improving and changing, and I will have to change with the times, no doubt, but I'm a pretty simple kitten.
I think it's important, you know, you don't really get intuition and coaching skills by, you know, buying new tech. I think being a podiatrist and practicing and seeing people is where you get your experience from. So, but I guess looking at our future footprint, what's next? What do you think our biggest growth or changes in sports podiatry in the next 5 years, Emma?
What I'd like to see, like what do I want to see, is growth and change in sports podiatry, is seeing more podiatrists engage in multidisciplinary sports medicine teams. That's my life mission. Is so what I want to see in the next 5 years, I want to see more teams contracting or assigning podiatrist roles. I think our profession reputation as a whole is improving. I think there are more podiatry roles opening up in elite sports and the sporting environment. So we need to like launch on this. Our profession has a good reputation and we need to keep that growing. We need to use that as leverage into the professional sports world or the semi-professional sports world. I think we're a long way from saying podiatrists will travel to championships, world championships, tournaments, big events. I think as much as I'd like to say, oh, podiatrists will travel like the sports doctors do and the myotherapists do and the physios do, I'm not convinced we'll see podiatrists traveling with every professional team anytime soon, but there is ongoing opportunities, hopefully, in the future. The other thing I want to see is, and this is something I've preached forever, is I want us as podiatrists to be the first point of call for every foot and ankle injury. And I've said this for years. Why are the foot and ankle injuries going to the GP, going to the chiro, the osteo, the physio, the myo, the witch doctor around the corner? Why are they not coming to us as the gatekeeper of the foot? So long term, I want us to be the number one point of call for all foot and ankle injuries. So that's something that I've been preaching for a long time. And that's where we need to step up and, you know, become that profession, become that point of call sooner rather than later would be nice. But I think there's definitely an opportunity sort of to uptake podiatry holistically in the sports environment moving forward.
Given our low participation rates at the moment, do you think we should be volunteering our time, doing a lot of services for, I guess, I wouldn't say free, but, you know, quite low value, so then they actually see what we do, so then they kind of bring us in?
Yeah, look, there's a certain, I'm going to do this for free to educate and grow my skill set. There's I'm going to do this for free to grow and educate the community's knowledge of podiatry. And then there's I'm underselling the profession as a whole by giving my services away for free. So it's a bit of a really fine line that I need to use your sporting club or your athletes to help my profession. That's a great thing to do. If you want to grow your knowledge of podiatry and sports podiatry and working with athletes, volunteer your time, upskill yourself. That's excellent. If you want to increase the awareness of podiatry by volunteering your time, giving, you know, you might go and give a local talk at the footy club about boot selection, for example, and then that's a positive thing. The only thing I'm sort of err on the side of caution would be I'm going to undersell my skill set, offer it for free, and undervalue the profession as a whole, because that sends our profession backwards 20 years. We're now in a position where podiatrists are employed or contracted and paid to do what they do at a high level. And it's not a selfish thing to say that. We've all been to uni, we've all studied, we've all worked. We need to maintain that level of professionalism and not undersell or give our skill set away for free. So that's something that we need to be careful of as a profession.
Yeah.
So Ian,
sorry, you go, Harriet. You go, Harriet.
That's all right. I was just looking at the next question on our list, and it was actually one that Em touched on just in the question before. Young podiatrists looking to get into elite sports. I suspect there'd be quite a big number of people interested. Where do they find the opportunities and how do they start?
Yeah, so look, every podiatrist you speak to, every physio you speak to, if you ask first-year physio students day one of university, who wants to be a sports physio and work in the AFL, 400 hands will go up in the lecture theatre. It's actually kind of comical because they don't all end up there, let's be honest. So, and the same for podiatry. And I was that podiatrist. I said from the get-go, I'm going to work in sports because of my sporting background. To give you a really nutshell of where I started, some kids work at Macca's and Coles when they're 15. I worked at Old Zabs in the A-grade amateur footy club. So I actually worked as a sport trainer as my high school job, opposed to a supermarket or a retail job. So I worked very early in the amateur football world, and I progressed to VFL while I was at university. So when I was at uni, I was actually working in the VFL, the Box Hill Hawks, for Hawthorn's reserves. So how do you get your foot in the door? You don't walk into the top job. That's the hard and fast reality. It's 20 years this year. It was 20 years Labor Day weekend. I've been a podiatrist in the clinic, and I worked my tail off to sort of work into these roles and form a footprint in these roles. And I went through the amateurs, I went through the VFL and up to the AFL over an extended period of time. And that would be my recommendation for those who want to get involved in sport. Start at your local club, start networking. If you do a really good job at the local club, people talk, people will come and see you. and then you can sort of go up to the next level and work your way up from there. And prove me wrong, but there's no easy way in. You've got to do some of the hard yards. So obviously go to local clubs, again, expose yourself to athletes, expose yourself to consults, fixing those athletes. If you can, get a mentor. If you can, work alongside or sit in. I do allow people to sit in at the clinic. I don't complete university placements because I can't give 9 to 5, 6 weeks in a row. I unfortunately can't take people with me to the football club or the AO. So please don't ask me that because it's just a confidentiality thing and accreditation thing. But I guess sitting in with people, learning from senior pods is something to reach out and ask to do.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
My next question, I was asked to do I guess a little bit of a blog for the SEPA website. And one of the questions was, what do you perceive the roadblocks are for women in sports podiatry? And I actually modeled my answer off you, Emma, so I'm gonna flatter you for a minute. My answer was, the best sports podiatrist I know is a female, and I'm not sure, I think that the gap between male and female podiatrists in terms of skill set, in terms of able to become elite sports podiatrist, is closing. Do you think that's happening, or do you still see quite a big space?
Look, I think I had the same question as well that I might have
Oh,
answered,
did you?
that I might have answered recently. Here's the deal. Yes, in sport, there is still some very highly male-dominated sporting codes or sporting areas. Some sports are improving. Some sports are saying that really old school closed man sort of environment. And it depends what sporting code we're talking about. Some sports are starting to open up. AFL is one of those sports that's become very good in accepting and allowing females to work in that space. Are there roadblocks? Yes, there are. Are they coming down slowly? Yes, they are. Are there going to be some there long term? Unfortunately, yes, there are. So how do we navigate them? I think, again, it comes down to doing a good job, proving yourself on your skill set. And I'm a huge believer, probably because I am that female that's pushed into such male-dominated areas, that it should always be the best person with the best skill sets for the job, regardless if you're male or female.
Yep.
And that's something that I've sort of always worked on, that who's the best person for the job? Am I skilled to be here? Because if you're bullshitting and you're not, you'll get caught out. But unfortunately, there are roadblocks. But at the same time, if you've got the skill set, you've got the patience, the confidence, and you keep it professional at all time, you'll eventually sort of, work your way up.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that.
Well, I guess that takes us to our final strides. Emma, where can our listeners connect with you and follow your work?
I keep things simple, as I've mentioned a few times, and I'm seriously not a social media guru. I'm not good on social media. I don't run my own podiatry education. So look, here's the deal. Upfront and honest, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. They're probably the 3 that I'm rolling. They're not the places where I'm going to lead you to say, have a look at this. You're going to learn an entire podiatry career. So look, you can find me, my clinical practices at Alphington Sports Medicine Clinic and Life Care Paran Sports Medicine. They're my 2 clinical practices. We mentioned Western Bulldogs, Australian Open, but the 2 clinics are where I'm based. And then look, social media or online stuff is, as I said, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, but they're not really podiatry sort of targeted specifics, so to speak.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you giving us your time to come on to the show. And our listeners have definitely learned a lot tonight.
Thanks, Emma.
Cheers.